what does he get from Zelensky? He gets detached from reality. He gets these demands. He gets thrown under the bus by Zelensky. I mean, just think of how crazy that is, that the guy who is on the bottom edge of the power dynamic, the guy who has the least number of cards, the least amount of leverage, is making these cocky comments as though he's on the top. Even Putin doesn't make these kinds of statements. He actually comes off as a statesman, as somebody who has a lot of power but is willing to have a discussion and treats people with respect. And instead, you have Zelensky throwing Trump under the bus and saying, man, him, Vice President Vance, at least twice, he says, yeah, they don't understand what's going on. I think they've been duped by Russian propaganda, i.e. translation, they're so stupid that they don't know that they're being played by Russia. But I do. I'm not stupid. I'm aware, so I can see it. But it's just really sad that the President of the United States and the Vice President of the United States are just duped by these Russian guys. That's what he's saying, and I assure you that message is being received. And then, of course, Trump's primary guy, Steve Witkoff, he said he's not only doesn't consider him, but he said he's not even qualified to have his job. So he doesn't even think that he's relevant qualifications to even have any of these discussions. So the number one designated guy by the President of the United States, the Vice President, and the President himself are all thrown into the rhetorical bus by Zelensky, and repeatedly. And then we see that it's not just that he's throwing people under the bus, but when one of the absolute key things that Trump is trying to get done, recognition of Crimea as Russian territory, which it is part of any kind of a negotiated settlement, Zelensky does this.
Україна не визнає юридично окупацію Криму. Нема про що говорити. Це поза нашою Конституцією. Це наша територія. Територія народу України. Ми не можемо просто, а чому би ні? Чого не буде? Мені здається, що...
So, yeah, he's just saying, no, we're not. And that, I mentioned this before, but his body language there is like, and what you going to do about it? Yeah, I don't want to give it up, so we're not going to. Remember, that was what started that was the fuse that was lit that started this war. The one in 2022, not the Civil War. That started in 2014. But this one started really, the fuse was lit in March 2021 when Zelensky signed a law that said they're going to retake the temporarily occupied Crimea. And now then, he's still sticking with that, even though he has no control over it, even though the vast majority of the people are ethnic Russians and want to be in Russia and are happy that they're not in Ukraine anymore, and their quality of life is substantially better than it was by all the reports that I've seen. They don't want to come back. They don't ever want to come back. They would feel absolutely just abandoned and I guess rejected by Russia if Putin were to ever agree to anything else. It's actually part of the Russian Federation. It's in their constitution, as it is for the 4 other areas. So Russia already it's just de facto, absolutely, and de jure Russian territory. So there's nothing to discuss for their side, but they do need and they do desire international recognition because that helps foster a post-war situation and a return to normalcy, etc., that they want. So that is something that's important to the Russian side. But Zelensky doesn't want to acknowledge the reality of it. And so even though that was the fuse that started the war, even now in a chance to end the war and to rectify that error back then, he's not wanting to have any part of it. He says, nope, I'm just going to continue to stick here. So we reject it. It's our territory. And no, it's not your territory. It used to be your territory. But because you refused to do the Minsk agreements, and because your country anyway was taking part in this the coup that took place where the legally elected government of Ukraine was forced out of office and then started a civil war, which resulted in Russia annexing Crimea. Absent that, remember this is crucial to understand. If you're a Westerner and you want to understand why Russia does what it does, and we've shown Sergei Lavrov, who's mentioned this before. In February, I forget the exact date, February 2014, there was negotiations between Russian negotiators, European negotiators, and Ukraine negotiators. And they all came together and they said, okay, all of this stuff that's been going on in the Maidan, tell you what, President Yanukovych said, we will agree to early elections. We'll hold elections in May of that year. So just a few months hence. Sergei Lavrov said that we knew that almost certainly the popular tide had turned. And when you talk about the electoral votes of the entire country, or the electoral decisions of the entire country, almost certainly their guy would lose. The one that they wanted to would lose the election. And they knew that, and they were willing to stand by it. But because we weren't, and we said, no, we're going to now use force, the Ukraine side did, and they sent their army against their own people. Anyone who was ethnic Russian, they started moving against them. You may recall that in Odessa, they burned several of them alive in a building. It was just horrific. And then, of course, they started using artillery, planes, infantry, all kinds of stuff, armor against their own people in the east, as they said, no, we don't want to live under that kind of a place anymore. And they said, yeah, you will, or we'll kill you. And of course, that started the Civil War. At that time, that's when Russia said, okay, not only no, but hell no, we're going to now annex Crimea. Now, many people have complained about Putin that why didn't you make that move then to protect the people in the Donbass instead of letting this fester for 8 years of a civil war? Yeah, so ironically, he could have done it earlier and didn't, but he did on Crimea. All of that started here, and now then Zelensky still is not willing to face with reality. That is now dawning on the president of the United States. And that's why earlier this week, when J.D. Vance was going to India, he was asked on the tarmac, where are we on this whole negotiating thing?
We've issued a very explicit proposal to both the Russians and the Ukrainians, and it's time for them to either say yes or for the United States to walk away from this process. We've engaged in an extraordinary amount of diplomacy, of on-the-ground work. We've really tried to understand things from the perspective of both the Ukrainians and the Russians. What do Ukrainians care the most about? What do the Russians care the most about? And I think that we've put together a very fair proposal. We're going to see if the Europeans, the Russians, and the Ukrainians are ultimately able to get this thing over the finish line. Again, I feel pretty optimistic about it. I think everybody has been negotiating in good faith, but it's now time, I think, to take, if not the final step, one of the final steps, which is at a broad level, the parties saying, we're going to stop the killing, we're going to freeze the territorial lines at some level close to where they are today.
So he was referring to a plan. Now, this many news organizations have leaked this. It's a 7-point plan. Gary, I don't remember. Do we have that ready to show? I sent that earlier this morning. I'll see if you can grab that. There's a 7-point plan.
Danny?
It's something.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you can pull that up. There was a 7-point plan, and this is what Trump has said to all the parties. This is what I'm willing to do. He said, number one, it's going to be the recognition of Crimea as Russian territory. Number two, de facto recognition of Russian advances, meaning where they have taken on the ground in the Donbass and all the areas where they currently occupy. A ban on Ukraine joining NATO, lifting sanctions imposed on Russia since 2014, resumption of economic relations between the U.S. and Russia, and strategic minerals agreement reconstruction shared with Ukraine. And I seem to have left the 7th point off. I can't recall what that one was at the moment. That one is, sorry, the 7th one is the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. That's number 7. So those 7 things. Now, let's don't try to put lipstick on a pig. That's ugly. For the Ukraine side, that's really awful. I mean, you have to say that Crimea is never coming back. You have to acknowledge it. You don't have to acknowledge, you don't have to de jure recognize that the other territories are Russian, but it is, and it's de facto. You're never going to join NATO. Russia's going to get the sanctions lifted on. What Biden had said was going to be crippling sanctions and was going to bring Russia to its knees, didn't. And now then even that we're going to lift off. And even though Russia has been able to recover and was actually growing at a much stronger rate than anyone in Europe, now then you're going to release those sanctions, and they're going to be even stronger economically. The resumption of economic relations between the U.S. and Russia, i.e. we're going to go back to some kind of normalized relationship. And then that 6th one, I think, is a real sticking point to a lot of Ukrainians, because it's saying, hey, the U.S. is going to get a mineral deal with Ukraine where we get revenue sharing stuff, and it's not clear for what. It's not clear what the Ukraine side's getting out of that. This alleged security guarantee de facto, but it's not. It's just an opportunity to make money, and so that one's a hard pill for them to swallow as well. And then the control of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. I'm not sure that's acceptable by anybody, either the Russians or the Ukrainian side. They're not going to want to do that. But listen, that's awful from the Ukraine side. There's no question about it. But this is something I have been really emphasizing lately, and I definitely want to do it here. The only reason why this ugly deal is on the table right now is because the West writ large has been absolutely categorically unwilling to accept any of the previous better deals. I have been saying since the damn war started, every time you refuse to make a negotiated settlement, the deal gets worse the next time. And more people die in the meantime, and more territory gets lost. It's been that way from the outset. If the Minsk agreements had been administered, there would never have been a war. If the election had been allowed to take place in May of 2014, Crimea would still be under Kiev control to this day. And of course, I don't need to go through all the rest of them in Istanbul and et cetera, all the way through. Every time we've rejected diplomacy, the Russians continued their military deal, their military march, and the deal got worse for Ukraine. And the deal that was offered in June of last year is worse, is not as bad as the one that's being offered now, because now it's the terms are much worse for the Ukraine side. And hear me carefully. If we don't accept this deal, meaning the Ukraine side, if the Ukraine and Europeans especially, if they don't accept this deal, this is, I believe, the last diplomatic alternative. I believe that the Russians, if they don't get this deal, then they're going to just foreclose diplomacy, and they're just going to march on until they have physically taken everything they want on the battlefield, and will simply issue terms of surrender to the Ukraine side. That's where I think this could go. May take them a long time. I don't know how fast. I don't know how long the Ukraine side could hang on, especially if the U.S. says, oh, that's it, we're washing our hands, we're moving on. It could take another year. It could take more than that, or it could literally fall apart in a matter of weeks once the United States go in. It's not a science, so it's impossible to say with any certainty. But all those things are possible. But whether it's fast, medium, or slow, it's still going to be a Ukraine loss. The balance of power between the two sides and the political will on the Russian side and their capacity could go on for multiple years like this, and Ukraine likely couldn't survive months. That's the reality of it. Now, given those realities, even if you want a fantasy outcome, even if you'd like to have a Hollywood script where you write just what you would prefer for reality, when it comes to what they used to in the military used to say, nut cutting time, this is where it becomes real. Then, of course, the Ukraine side is going to say, all right, fine, we'll go ahead and agree to that just so we can live. Or so you would think.
The government, the officials, they're trying their best, I think, to keep it cool, but just sticking to their position, which is that recognition of Russian sovereignty over any occupied Ukrainian territory is a red line for them. They will never accept that, but potentially de facto admitting that Russia has control over it and freezing the conflict might be on the table, but that's only in talks that have to take place once a ceasefire is in place. They say ceasefire first, substantive talks later.
Okay, so I guess they're going to continue on with the fiction, because they want to freeze the contact, they want a full ceasefire first, and listen, they're just detached from reality. I mean, there's just no good way around it. Russia has categorically said, we're not going to have an unconditional ceasefire. Not even consider it. They'll consider it a very conditional ceasefire if they get the things that they're asking for. Then they'll consider it. And those are a high ask too. But not even contemplating a full ceasefire without grave conditions being attached to it. But that's what he still wants. And Russia has said from the beginning that they didn't even really want a ceasefire at all, but they did want diplomacy. They said, we're interested in having negotiations that get to the root causes of this and provide an end to the war, and then we'll stop firing here. And by the way, this whole thing about you want to freeze it on the current line of contact, and that was a little bit referred to even in Vice President Vance's comments a minute ago, something close to the current line of contact. I'm not sure that that's right. I'm not sure that the Russians will consider something close. I've shown you that map many times over the last couple of months, to where you see there are large sections, especially in the southern three of those provinces, that are substantial areas still controlled by the Ukraine side. They would have to agree to withdraw from all that. Not just the military, but any Ukrainian person who doesn't want to live under Russian control would have to leave the country, or that territory, and would have to go somewhere else, either flee abroad or go elsewhere in Ukraine. Those are major, major asks.